This video is called Thick Skin and Mind Reading because it's about what to do with feedback from playtesters when you receive it, and it's not necessarily the positive affirmation that you may have been hoping for. All games at all stages of the design process are going to end up having things that need to be improved, and that's just how it is. And sometimes you can be working on something that works quite well for most of the game design stages for a month or two, and then when you start doing actual physical review prototypes and sending them out to people in the industry or blind testing or feedback, you actually find that that part of the game isn't working or people don't like it. So there's generally three things to do when you get constructive feedback or negative feedback, or just people saying that they hate a particular part of your game. The first is to obviously take a breath and think, okay, this isn't a criticism of me as a person or my creativity or my work ethic necessarily. It's usually just a criticism of the game itself, and that information may be intended to be helpful. It's just coming out in a way that's maybe not quite as helpful. The second thing to do is think, well, what is at the core of what they're saying? Try and interpret a little bit who the person is, and maybe what their background in games is, what their preferences might be a little bit. You don't necessarily have to ask them, these are just tips, if you know the person well enough. And think, are they necessarily criticizing this particular game, or are they talking about this genre of games? So if you're doing a card game and there's someone that really likes board games, then yeah, that might be it. They just don't like using cards. Or if you're doing a game with role-playing elements, maybe they don't like role-playing elements and things like that. I once had a game where I sent it to a reviewer and they gave me a 1 on Boardgame Geek, which is a out of 10, which is the biggest and most important place for game reviews, because they didn't like that style of game. And I thought that that felt unfair, because I was like, well, A, why did you agree to reviewing it if you don't like that style of game? And B, does that mean that other people won't necessarily enjoy it? Does that mean that for everyone that could possibly look at it, it's a 1 out of 10? Anyway. So you will get some pretty intense criticism and negative feedback. But that's just part of it. It's part of anything. And if you're working in an academic environment, you would have gotten some pretty intense feedback from supervisors and things before. So, so step 1 is, just take a breath. It's not personal, generally. Step 2 is go, well, what is the context of this feedback? Is it necessarily relevant to my particular game? And then the third step is to, sort of have a bit of a thick skin and go, okay, well, maybe that part of the game isn't really that good, and I need to think of some alternatives to that particular mechanic or particular aspect of the game. Maybe it doesn't need to be in there. And people will generally be pretty good at telling you stuff that doesn't feel like it needs to be in the game or should be implemented in a slightly different way. So you might have, to go back to an early example from one of the previous nodes, a game about marine science that has a currency system, and you might just not need that to be in there. It might be slowing down gameplay and people aren't really into it, even though there might be other reasons for design, or just it's been in there for a while, or accuracy, or stakeholder kind of preferences and things like that. So I think overall the best piece of advice for dealing with negative feedback would be to treat it lightly and analyze it as a useful piece of information, and go, well, is this is a recommendation in a way? Do I need to sort of recontextualize it, or is it something that's sort of really valid to this game? So the there's no downloadable resource for this particular node. It's more just a recommendation, and you can use the previous node from node 10, gathering player feedback, to sort of break down some of the more critical feedback you might get, and try and figure out yeah, what the core of it is. But again, please ask any questions down in the comments in this section. And yeah, best of luck.